Hello, friends. We are interested in the geography of our views, so please like and write in the comments from which city are you watching us, and were there loud stories of betrayal in your city? Share your stories with us. Maybe the next betrayal story will be from your city, and we start. The sun was setting over the Atlantic, painting the sky in shades of coral and gold. In the small coastal town of Port Haskell, South Carolina, the sea breeze carried the smell of salt and marsh grass. Edward Hartson stood leaning against the railing of the veranda of their two-story home, a shabby but proud structure perched on a dune overlooking the waves. The house was their sanctuary, white wooden walls, blue shutters, and a wrap-around veranda where he and Michelle spent countless evenings watching storms approach or sipping sweet tea under the stars. 20 years of marriage had woven their love into every creaking floorboard and every photograph on the mantelpiece. Edward, a former Marine and now an auto repair shop owner, was a broad-shouldered man with calloused hands and a quiet strength. His short hair was now streaked with gray, but his brown eyes retained the sharpness of a man who had seen war and came out of it alive. Michelle, his wife, was something of his opposite, petite, with reddish hair pulled back into a loose ponytail and a smile that could charm a shark. The manager of a local travel agency, she had a knack for making strangers feel at home, and her southern accent was as warm as a summer afternoon. Together, they were Port Haskell's golden couple, reliable, stable, the kind who would lend you his pickup truck or bring you a casserole when you were down. Their son, Caleb, was a 19-year-old student at Clemson University studying engineering. The house seemed quieter without him, but Edward and Michelle filled the silence with their habits. The morning began with coffee on the veranda. Edward was reading the newspaper. Michelle was flipping through her email. Evenings were spent cooking together shrimp and grits or her famous pecan pie or barbecues that drew half the town. Their life was like a postcard. At least that's what it seemed like. But under this idyll, something was smoldering. Edward was at his auto repair shop, Hartson's Auto, elbow deep in a Chevrolet engine, when Michelle peered through the office door. The workshop smelled of oil and rubber, and horse rock music came from the radio. "Ed, are you coming to dinner?" she shouted. Her voice was light, but there was some kind of shadow in it that he could not catch. He wiped his hands with a rag, squinting at it in the fluorescent light. "Yes, about 6. Are you making that same gumbo?" "Only if you say please, my beauty," she teased, but the smile did not reach her eyes. She paused, fiddling with the strap of her bag. "I have a late meeting with a client, so I might be late." "No problem," he replied, returning to the engine. "I'll heat up the stove." She nodded and left, the bell above the door jingling. Edward frowned, a knot in his stomach. Michelle was acting. Strange. Absently. Her phone buzzed more than usual, and she began to block at something she had never done before. He brushed the thoughts aside, telling himself it was paranoia. 20 years don't just disappear. Michelle drove her SUV along the coastal highway, the ocean glistening to the right. Her meeting was not with a client. She parked at a small diner 15 miles out of town, where no one from Port Haskell could see her. Inside, she sat in a booth opposite a man in a neat shirt with dark, slicked-back hair. David Reese, a real estate developer from Charleston, had been using her agency for months, booking expensive vacations for his clients. Their conversations started out as business conversations: Paris, Tokyo, the Maldives, but somewhere along the way they turned down a different path. Flirting letters. Coffee here, lunch there. Nothing physical yet, but the attraction was palpable. "You look tense," David said, his voice smooth as bourbon. He reached across the table, touching her hand. She pulled away, looking out the window. "Just work. It's a busy season." He raised an eyebrow. "Michelle, I know you. What's really going on?" She sighed, fiddling with her napkin. "I don't know, David. I love Ed. Is it true? But lately it's like neighbors. He is so stable, so predictable. I feel like I'm suffocating in my routine." David leaned closer, his gaze locked on hers. "You deserve better. You are bright, Michelle. You light up the room. Don't let this city or anyone dim your light." Her chest tightened. She wanted to argue, to defend her life with Edward, but the words stuck. Instead, she changed the subject by asking about his latest project. But as they talked, her thoughts wandered to Edward, to the way he looked at her in the workshop, as if he knew something was wrong but was too stubborn to ask. Edward closed his workshop earlier than usual. His friend Tommy, a tow truck driver, stopped by with a six-pack of beer, and they settled into the office with their feet up on the desk. "Are you and Michelle okay?" Tommy asked, opening the bottle. "I saw her leaving the city." As if she was in a hurry. Edward's jaw tensed. "She has a meeting." Tommy snorted. "Yeah, of course. Have you ever wondered what she does when you're not around?" "Watch your language," Edward snapped, but without much malice. Tommy's words stung. He noticed the little things. Michelle's late returns, the way she flinched when her phone screen lit up. He was not a jealous person, but doubts began to seep in like dampness. After Tommy left, Edward drove home, the radio silent. The house greeted him in darkness. Michelle's car was gone. He looked at the phone. 18:45, no messages. He heated up the leftover dinner and ate alone at the kitchen table, the ticking of the clock echoing in the silence. By 8 o'clock, the anxiety began to gnaw at him. He called her, but got on voicemail. "Hey, honey, just checking if everything is okay." "Let me know," he hung up, looking at the photo on the refrigerator, the three of them at Caleb's graduation, smiling as if the whole world belonged to them. When she arrived at the house, Edward was on the veranda with a beer in his hand, his face unreadable in the dim light. "Late meeting," she said, putting on a smile as she walked up the steps. "Looks like it was successful," he answered in an even tone. "You didn't call." Her stomach dropped. "Sorry, Ed. It took a long time. You know how it goes." He stood, towering over her, but not approaching her. "Do I know? Because lately I'm not sure." The air between them sparkled. Michelle opened her mouth, but no words came. Edward's eyes studied her, and for the first time in years, she saw something alive in them, pain, perhaps, or fear. "Michelle," he said quietly, "if you have something to say, just say it." She froze, her heart pounding. The truth trembled on the tip of her tongue, but she could not squeeze it out. Not now, not like that. "I'm tired," she finally said, sliding past him. "I'll go to bed." Edward watched her leave as the screen door slammed. He remained on the veranda, the ocean roaring in the distance, and he wondered how the hell they had gotten this far and if they could find their way back. The beach in front of Tammy Lawson's house glowed with the warmth of a fire that crackled under the stars. Port Haskell, South Carolina, was enveloped in the soft breath of the ocean, the waves licking the shore to the rhythm of the old blues flowing from a portable speaker. Tammy, Michelle Hartson's best friend, celebrated her 10th wedding anniversary in style, with long tables piled high with fried shrimp, corn on the cob, and trays of homemade pies lining the dunes. Lanterns suspended from the awnings swayed in the wind, casting golden reflections on the faces of the guests. Half the town was here, from fishmonger owners to school teachers, and the air was buzzing with laughter, the clinking of bottles, and bits of old stories. Edward and Michelle Hartson came together, but there was an invisible wall between them. After their recent tense conversation on the veranda, they tried to act as usual, smiling at their neighbors, singing along to the tunes, but their eyes rarely met. Edward, wearing jeans and a plaid shirt, stood by the fire with a bottle of beer, chatting with Tommy, his tow truck driver friend. Michelle, wearing a light sundress that accentuated her red hair, laughed with Tammy at the drinks table, but her fingers nervously fiddled with the rim of a plastic glass. Tammy, a curvaceous blonde with a loud laugh and a habit of hugging everyone, raised her margarita glass to call for silence. "Friends, you all know why we are here," she shouted, her southern accent ringing like a bell. 10 years with my Danny, and I still haven't strangled him for snoring. Let's drink to love, to friends, and to nights that we will not forget." The crowd roared, raising glasses and bottles. Danny, a lanky electrician with a good-natured grin, put his arm around Tammy's waist and kissed her on the cheek, drawing cheers from the guests. Edward looked at Michelle across the fire. She was smiling, but her eyes were somewhere far away. He squeezed the bottle a little tighter. The party was gaining momentum. Someone brought a guitar, and soon a couple of local guys were playing Johnny Cash covers. Children ran along the beach waving glow sticks, while adults sat on blankets or folding chairs. Tammy, already slightly tipsy, dragged Michelle onto the makeshift dance floor. The sand under their feet was still warm from the afternoon sun. "Come on, miss, shake the bones." Tammy laughed, twirling with her glass. "Do you remember how we danced at the prom? God, we were such idiots." Michelle laughed, but her movements were constrained. "Tam, I'm not the same girl who danced until dawn." "Nonsense," Tammy winked. "You just forgot what it's like to be yourself." "Hey, Ed," she shouted over the crowd. "Get your wife before I drag her off to Mexico." Edward, standing with Tommy and a couple of other guys, grinned, but his gaze lingered on Michelle. She looked at him, and for a second their eyes met. Something like guilt flashed in her gaze. But the moment passed, and she turned away, caught up in another dance by Tammy. Tommy elbowed Edward. "She's kind of not in business today, huh? Or are you spending the night in your workshop again?" "Watch your language," Edward muttered, but without malice. He took a sip of his beer, trying to push away the thoughts of the past weeks. Michelle's late returns, her locked phone, the way she dodged his questions. Around 10 o'clock, the party became louder, and the conversations became more frank. Someone brought whiskey, and the bottle went around. Old stories emerged one after another. How Danny once got stuck on a boat in the middle of the bay, how Tammy, as a young woman, convinced the entire bar to sing karaoke, how Edward and Michelle once ran away from the town fair to make out on the pier. The laughter was loud, but there was a sense of nostalgia in it as time passed and Port Haskell changed, as did the people within it. Tammy, flushed from the drink and the heat of the fire, clapped her hands to attract attention. "Okay, stop talking about the past. Let's play a game." She picked up the empty beer bottle. "Not in the bottle, perverts," she added as the crowd laughed. "I never. Who knows the rules?" Everyone knew. The guests, about 20, sat in a circle on the sand, a fire crackling in the center. Edward and Michelle found themselves opposite each other, separated by flames and a dozen friends. Tammy began, holding the bottle like a microphone. "I've never. I got so drunk that I woke up in someone else's yard." She giggled at Danny, who rolled his eyes and took a sip from his glass. Several people followed suit, including Tommy, who raised his hand shouting, "I was young and stupid." Laughter rolled around the circle. Danny was next. "I never. Lied to leave work early." Half the circle drank, including Michelle. Edward noticed how she quickly looked away after taking a sip. He also drank, remembering how a couple of times he had come up with excuses to close the workshop and go fishing. But something about Michelle's movement, the way she pressed her lips together, made him frown. The game continued. Clara, the owner of a local bakery, said, "I never kissed anyone other than my husband after the wedding." Silence hung for a second. Several people laughed, but the circle was surprisingly sober. No one drank. Edward looked at Michelle. She sat motionless, looking at the sand, her glass frozen in her hand. His heart skipped a beat. She didn't drink, but her silence was louder than any sip. Tommy, not noticing the tension, said the following: "I have never kept a secret from my other half." Edward felt the air thicken. He took a sip, a small thing, like the time he broke their old vase and blamed it on Caleb. But when he looked at Michelle, she was drinking too, slowly, almost reluctantly. Their eyes met across the fire, and this time there was a storm in her gaze, a mixture of challenge and fear. He clenched his jaw, trying to figure out what it meant. "Wow, how mysterious we are." Tammy laughed, diffusing the moment. "Miss Ed, are you writing spy novels there?" Michelle forced a smile. "It's just, things happen, Tam." Edward remained silent, but his thoughts were spinning like an idling engine. He remembered her late meetings, her phone number, which she now always kept with her. Secrets. What secrets is she hiding from him? The game continued, the questions became bolder. Some admitted that they stole candy from the store as a child. Others admitted that they pretended to be sick so as not to go to family dinners. But every time it was Michelle's turn, she seemed more distant. Edward, on the contrary, became more and more attentive, catching her every movement, every word. When it was his turn, he paused, looking straight at her through the flames. I never felt like I was losing someone I loved. The circle fell silent. It was not in the spirit of the game, too personal, too heavy. Michelle froze, her fingers clenching the glass until her knuckles turned white. She didn't drink, but her eyes sparkled, and Edward couldn't tell if it was from the fire or from tears. He took a sip himself, feeling the whiskey burn his throat. Several people followed him, but their movements were awkward, as if they were intruding on someone else's drama. Tammy cleared her throat, trying to regain her amusement. Okay, let's do something easier. I've never sung in the shower thinking I was a rock star. The laughter returned, but Edward and Michelle were no longer involved. She stood up, muttered something about drinks, and went to the table. Edward stared after her, his chest tightening. He knew he should follow her, ask her what was going on, but his feet felt rooted to the sand. Michelle stood at the drinks table, pouring herself a soda even though her glass was almost full. Her hands were shaking. Edward's question struck like a knife. He knew, maybe not everything, but he felt that she was slipping away. She thought about David, about his words in that diner, about the way he looked at her as if she were the only woman in the world, and about how Edward looked at her today with pain, with a question that she could not answer. Tammy approached, swaying slightly. Hey, are you okay? You and Ed. Something's wrong, right? Michelle shook her head, putting on a smile. I'm just tired, Tam. Everything is fine. Don't lie to me, Michelle Hartson. Tammy narrowed her eyes. I've known you since you were in the cradle. If you're chewing on something, tell me. Michelle opened her mouth, but the word stuck. How do you explain that she loves Edward but feels trapped? That David is not a betrayal, but the spark she's been missing. She couldn't. Not here, not now. Later, she said quietly. I promise. Tammy nodded, but her gaze was filled with concern. She hugged Michelle and returned to the guests, leaving her alone with the sound of the ocean and the heaviness of her own thoughts. Edward remained by the fire, but his thoughts were with Michelle. The game continued, but he was no longer listening. He saw her talking to Tammy, her shoulders tense. He knew he had to do something, talk, insist, but fear stopped him. What if the truth ruins everything? 20 years, their home, their family. He took another sip, but the whiskey didn't help. For the first time in a long time, Edward Hartson, a former Marine accustomed to facing problems head-on, felt helpless. The party was buzzing, the ocean was singing its eternal song, and a gap was growing between Edward and Michelle, which neither of them yet knew how to cross. The beach at Port Haskell was buzzing with fun, the fire burning brighter than ever, casting dancing shadows on the sand. Tammy Lawson's 10th anniversary party to Danny was in full swing. The air was filled with the smell of fried shrimp, salty breeze, and wood smoke. The music had changed from blues to something livelier, old rock and roll, and several couples were already stomping around in the sand, laughing and spilling beer. Flashlights flickered, reflecting in the eyes of the guests, and bottles of whiskey and tequila passed from hand to hand, making voices louder and jokes bolder. Edward and Michelle Hartson sat in a circle around the fire, where the game of Never Have I Ever resumed after a short break for dancing and eating. The tension between them, already simmering from previous rounds, seemed to dissipate slightly in the general chaos of the party. Michelle, holding a plastic margarita glass, laughed a little louder than usual, her cheeks flushed from the drink and the heat. Edward, sitting opposite, was holding a beer, but his gaze was attentive, almost heavy. He noticed how her movements became freer, how she threw back her hair, how her laughter sounded slightly hysterical. Tammy, the party's hostess, took on the role of host once again. Her blonde locks bounced as she waved the empty bottle like a conductor's baton. Okay, people, let's fry, she shouted over the noise of the waves. Who's next? Misha, it's your turn. Give us something. Spicy, the crowd roared, cheering. Michelle giggled as she spilled some of her margarita on the sand. She swayed, leaning on her elbow, and her eyes were shining either from alcohol or from something else. Edward tensed, his fingers clenching around the bottle. He knew that look. Michelle always became too revealing when she overdid it. "Oh, Tam, you'll drive me to my grave," Michelle muttered, but her voice was playful. She cleared her throat, looking around the circle with a sly smile. "Okay, okay, I've never." She paused, as if searching for words, and her gaze flickered briefly to Edward. "I've never participated in a threesome." A moment of silence hung over the circle, and then the crowd erupted in laughter and surprised exclamations. Edward's friend Tommy whistled, slapping his knee. "Damn it, Michelle Hartson, you're full of surprises," he shouted, raising his glass. Clara, the baker, giggled, covering her mouth with her hand. Even Danny, the usually calm one, grinned and shook his head. Several people in the circle took sips, some with a grin, some with feigned embarrassment. But all eyes were on Michelle, who laughed as she lifted her glass and took a long sip, her eyes sparkling with mischief. "Wow, miss." Tammy elbowed her, barely holding back her laughter. "When did you manage to do this? Tell me, woman." Michelle waved it off, still giggling. "Oh, that was 100 years ago, Tam. Before Ed, before all this." She waved her hand, as if pushing away the memories. "Youth, stupidity, you know." The crowd laughed again, and someone shouted, "Details, details." But Edward didn't laugh. His face was frozen like a mask. He looked at Michelle, and their eyes met across the fire. In her eyes, behind the drunken bravado, fear flashed sharp, almost desperate. She quickly looked away, but it was too late. He saw. His heart sank as if someone had pressed a fist into his chest. Michelle continued to chatter in response to Tammy's teasing, but her voice was shaking, and she kept glancing at Edward. He sat motionless, his beer untouched. No one in the circle noticed how the air between them thickened, how the flame of the fire became the only sound in his ears. "Threesome," she said before Ed, but something in her tone, in her panic, told him that wasn't the whole truth. Or maybe he was just going crazy from suspicions that had been building for weeks. The game continued. Someone else asked a question, something about stealing as a child, but Edward wasn't listening anymore. His mind replayed her words like a broken record. Threesome. When? With whom? And why is she looking at him like he's about to explode? He tried to remember their early years. They started dating when she was 22. He was 24. She had been wild then, full of life, but he had never heard anything like it. Or did she hide it? And if so, what else is she hiding? He stood up without saying a word. His movements were mechanical, as if his body was moving on its own. He put the bottle on the sand and walked away from the fire, into the darkness, to the water's edge. The crowd didn't notice, too drunk, too engrossed in the game. But Michelle noticed. Her laughter died, and she watched his figure disappear into the shadows, her hand hovering over her glass. "Ed?" she called quietly, but her voice was drowned in the general noise. Tammy, who was sitting next to him, frowned. "What's wrong with him? It looks like he was touched by your adventures," she teased, but when she saw Michelle's face, she stopped short. "Hey, are you okay?" Michelle shook her head, her eyes sparkling. I'm a fool, Tam. I need to talk to him." She jumped up, almost dropping her glass, and hurried after Edward, her sandals sinking into the sand. Tammy shouted something after her, but Michelle didn't turn around. Her heart was pounding, panic tightening in her throat. She didn't want this. She didn't want her drunken chatter to come out like that. She didn't want to see that look in his eyes. She knew Edward. He didn't shout, didn't make a scene, but his silence was worse than any scream. Edward stood at the water's edge, the waves licking his boots. The ocean was black, only the foam was white in the moonlight. He breathed deeply, trying to calm the storm in his chest. Threesome. It shouldn't have bothered him. She said it was up to him, damn it. But her look, this fear, this shadow of guilt. He knew Michelle. She didn't know how to lie, not without him noticing. And the last weeks, her detachment, her phone, her meetings, all this was adding up to a picture that he did not want to see. He heard footsteps behind him. "Ed," her voice was quiet, almost pleading. He didn't turn around. His hands clenched into fists, and he stared at the horizon, where the sky merged with the sea. "Ed, please." Michelle stepped closer, her breathing uneven. It was a joke. Well, not exactly a joke, but it was so long ago. Before us. I was young and stupid. It doesn't mean anything. He turned slowly, his eyes dark, unreadable. "Then why did you look at me as if I had caught you in a lie?" His voice was low, almost a growl. "Why did you jump up like you were scalded and run after me?" Michelle opened her mouth, but the words stuck. Her face turned pale, even in the dark it was visible. I I didn't want you to think." She paused, fiddling with the hem of her sundress. "I just had too much, Ed. It came out. I didn't think you'd react like that." "Didn't you think so?" He stepped towards her, and she involuntarily retreated. "Michelle, I'm not a fool. I see that something is wrong. You're moving away. You hide your phone. You come home late and lie about meetings. And now this." He waved his hand towards the fire. "What should I think?" Her eyes filled with tears, but she clenched her teeth, trying to control herself. "You have to trust me," she said quietly. "I'm your wife. 20 years, Ed. Does this mean nothing?" He looked at her, and there was such pain in his gaze that she felt her heart breaking. "I trusted you," he said, "but you do everything to make me doubt." Michelle gasped as if she had been slapped in the face. She wanted to scream. She wanted to tell him everything about David, about her doubts, about how confused she was. But the words stuck like sand in my throat. Instead, she stepped towards him, holding out her hand. "Ed, please. Let's just go home. We'll talk there, not here." He looked at her hand, but didn't take it. "I'm not sure I want to talk now," he said, and his voice was as cold as the ocean. He turned and walked along the shore towards their house, leaving her alone. Michelle stood looking after him until his figure disappeared behind the dunes. Tears flowed down her cheeks, but she did not wipe them away. The party continued. Laughter, music, the clinking of glasses came to her as if from another world. She wrapped her arms around herself, feeling the cold creep under her skin. It was a fucking joke. Drunk, stupid joke. Yes, she had sex once, in college, with two guys she barely remembered. This was before Edward, before their love, before their life. But she knew that was not the point. The point was that he felt that she had given him the benefit of the doubt. She returned to the fire, but the fun no longer touched her. Tammy noticed her wet cheeks and immediately jumped. "Misha, what happened? Where's Ed?" She grabbed her hand, pulling her aside. Michelle shook her head. "I ruined everything, Tam." "He left. I said something stupid, and he—" She sobbed, unable to continue. Tammy hugged her, her voice softening. Hey, breathe. You and Ed have become stronger. It will cool down, and you will figure it out. Just give it time." Michelle nodded, but deep down she knew that time might not help. She thought about David, his words, the way he made her feel alive, and about the way Edward looked at her today, as if he was seeing her for the first time. She loved him, but something was broken, and she didn't know how to fix it. Edward walked home along the deserted road, his boots crunching on the gravel. The house was not far, but he was in no hurry. He wanted solitude, he wanted silence, so he could sort through the chaos in his head. Threesome. This shouldn't have bothered him. The past is the past. But her fear, her lies, her detachment, it all added up to something more. He remembered how she hid her phone, how she avoided his questions. He remembered Tommy's words. "Are you sure you know what she does?" He stopped, looking at the ocean. 20 years. Their son, their home, their life. He went through war, through losses, but nothing scared him more than the thought that he could lose her. Yet he could not ignore the truth that was staring him in the face. Something was wrong, and he didn't know if he had the strength to fix it or let it go. The party was left behind, its noise drowned out by the ocean. Edward walked on, alone, in the dark, not knowing what awaited him at home or whether there would even be anyone there when he returned. The Hartson house greeted Edward with silence, broken only by the creaking of the floorboards under his heavy steps. Port Haskell was asleep, and the ocean outside the window whispered its eternal song, but inside the house the air was thick with tension. Edward walked in without turning on the light, throwing his keys on the table by the door. His boots, still covered in sand from the beach, left footprints on the wooden floor. Tammy's party was behind him, but its echoes Michelle's words. Her panicked look burned like coals. He collapsed into a chair in the living room without taking off his jacket. Moonlight streamed through the window, illuminating the photographs on the fireplace. Their wedding, Caleb as a child, the three of them on the pier. 20 years. He clutched the armrests, trying to stop his hands from trembling. Threesome. Her drunken confession on the beach was like a punch in the gut, but it wasn't that in itself her fear, her lies, her detachment. He knew she was hiding something, and he knew he couldn't sleep until he figured out what. The door slammed. Michelle entered, her steps uneven, her sandals in her hand. She froze in the doorway of the living room when she saw him in the darkness. Her dress was wrinkled, her hair was disheveled, and her eyes were red, as if she had cried on the way home. "Ed," her voice trembled. "Are you here?" He didn't answer, just looked at her, his gaze as heavy as an anchor. She put her bag on the floor and slowly entered the room, as if she was afraid to scare away the beast. "We need to talk," she said, but her words sounded uncertain. "Should I talk?" His voice was low, almost a growl. He stood up, towering over her. "Do you think that after what you did at the party, I just want to talk?" Michelle winced, taking a step back. "It was stupid, Ed. I went overboard and blurted out nonsense. This was before you, before us. Why are you so worked up?" He stepped closer, his eyes burning. "Don't lie to me, Mitchell. I saw your look. You didn't just blurt it out. You were scared as if I had discovered your secret. So go ahead and post it. What are you hiding?" Her lips trembled, and she wrapped her arms around herself, as if to protect herself. "I'm not hiding anything. Jesus, Ed, that was 100 years ago. In college, with some guys, I don't even remember their names. Why are you making a tragedy out of this?" "Because you're lying," he barked, his voice echoing off the walls. "You've been lying to me for weeks, maybe months. Your phone, your meetings, your silence. I'm not blind, Mitchell. What's happening? Who is he?" She froze, her face turning pale. Who? Who is he?" Her voice broke. "You think Ed, how can you? How else can I think?" He hit the back of the chair with his fist. The wood cracked. "You move away, you hide. You look at me as if I were a stranger. And now this joke of yours on the beach. If it's not about another guy, then what is? Tell me, damn it." Michelle closed her eyes, tears rolling down her cheeks. She sank onto the sofa, her shoulders shaking. "Ed, please don't scream," she whispered. I didn't want it to happen like this." He stood over her, his chest heaving, but rage began to give way to cold fear. Her tears, her voice, it was not just drunken repentance. It was something more. "Mitchell," he said, quieter, but firmly. "Speak. Now." She looked up at him, eyes full of pain and guilt. Her hands clenched into fists, and she spoke, her voice barely audible. "It wasn't in college." She swallowed, her words falling like stones. "It was. When you were on duty. In Iraq. In 2007. Edward felt the floor disappear from under his feet. He froze, his mind refusing to accept her words. "What?" he exhaled. Michelle sobbed, covering her face with her hands. "I was alone, Ed. You were there, thousands of miles away, and I didn't know if you'd come back. Caleb was a baby. I was going crazy with fear, with loneliness. And there was one guy. From the bar. It happened once, I swear. Once, and I hated myself for it." He looked at her, his face was stony, but inside everything was crumbling. 2007. His second contract, sand, heat, explosions. He wrote letters to her, called her when he could, and dreamed of a home. And he clenched his jaw so that his teeth creaked. "One time," he repeated, his voice empty, "and you were silent. All these years. 20 years, Michelle. You looked into my eyes, slept in our bed, and were silent. I couldn't tell." She jumped up, her voice breaking into a scream. "I hated myself, Ed. I loved you, I waited for you, I prayed for you to come back. It was a mistake, a stupid, drunken mistake. I didn't mean to hurt you. Didn't mean to hurt. He stepped towards her, his eyes blazing. Do you think it doesn't hurt? Do you think I can just swallow this and forget about it? You cheated on me while I was risking my life, while I was thinking about you every damn second. Michelle was sobbing, her face wet with tears. I know I'm terrible. I know I don't deserve you. But I tried to fix it, Ed. I was a good wife. I tried. A good wife? He laughed, but the laughter was bitter, like poison. A good wife hasn't lied for 20 years. A good wife doesn't look at me like I'm an enemy, doesn't hide her phone, doesn't run to meetings. That's not all, is it? What else, Michelle? Who is this David? Her eyes widened, and she gasped as if he had hit her. Where are you from? She stopped short, realizing that she had given herself away. Edward froze, his heart skipping a beat. He didn't know any David. It was a shot in the dark based on a snippet of conversation with Tommy, who mentioned some real estate developer from Charleston. But her reaction, her horror, confirmed everything. Oh my God, he whispered, retreating. This is true. You. You again. No. Michelle extended her hands to him, but he recoiled. Ed, it's not what you think. David is. He's just a client. We talked, we flirted, but I didn't. I didn't sleep with him, I swear. Were you flirting? His voice was icy. Were you flirting with another guy while I was working, while I was trying to keep us together, after everything you've done? I'm confused, Ed. She fell to her knees, sobbing. I love you, but I feel empty. You are always so strong, so correct, and I don't know who I am without you. I didn't want this, I wanted to feel alive. He looked at her, at his wife, at the woman whom he loved more than life itself, and saw a stranger. Her words, her confessions, her excuses were like knives, each one cutting deeper. He wanted to scream, he wanted to break something, but the rage was too great, too heavy. She was choking him. Alive, he repeated, his voice dead. You wanted to feel alive. What about me? I lived for you, Mitchell. For us. For Caleb. So what did I get? Lie. Betrayal. Ed, please. She crawled towards him, grabbing his pant leg. We can fix this. I'll do anything. I'll go to a psychologist. I'll stop seeing David. Enough. He pulled away, his voice sharp as the blow of a whip. I don't want to listen to this. Not now. Maybe never. He turned and walked towards the door. Michelle shouted after him, her voice breaking. Ed, don't go. Please do not leave me. But he didn't stop. He grabbed the keys, slammed the door, and walked out into the night. His pickup was in the driveway, and he climbed inside, slamming the door so hard the windows shook. The engine roared, and he took off without looking back. The ocean was left behind, its roar drowning out her screams, but her words, her confessions sounded in his head like gunshots. Edward drove aimlessly, his hands gripping the steering wheel until his knuckles turned white. The road along the coast was empty, only the headlights picked out pieces of asphalt and rare road signs. He didn't know where he was going, maybe to the workshop, maybe to hell with himself. His mind was a chaos. Images of Michelle, her tears, her lies, mixed with memories their first night, her laughter, her letters that he read in the desert. 2007. She was with someone else while he thought she was waiting for him. And now David. Flirting. Another crack in their marriage. He hit the steering wheel and the horn broke the silence. Rage seethed within him, but underneath there was pain deep, tearing like an open wound. He loved her. Even now, knowing everything, he loved her. But how to live with this? How to look at her, knowing that she had lied to him for half of their lives? That she wanted to feel alive with someone else? The road led him to the pier, the same one where they kissed in their youth, where he proposed to her. He turned off the engine and stepped out, his boots clicking on the wooden planks. The ocean roared below, waves crashing against the pilings. He stopped at the edge, looking into the darkness. The wind whipped his face, but he did not feel the cold. He felt only emptiness. 20 years, their son, their home, everything he had built was falling apart. and he didn't know how to stop it. He didn't know if he wanted to stop it. The only thing he knew for sure was that he could not return home. Not now. Maybe never. Edward stood on the pier, alone as the night consumed him, and for the first time in years he allowed himself to cry. Michelle remained on the living room floor, her sobs echoing through the empty house. She clutched her knees, her body shaking with tears. She heard his pickup truck drive away, the engine dying off in the distance. He left. She destroyed everything with one drunken phrase, one old sin, one weakness. She loved him, but it wasn't enough. Not now. She looked up at the photographs on the mantelpiece. Their happy life looked at her, but it was a lie. She always knew that the truth would come out one day. And now that this happened, she didn't know how to live on without him, without them. Edward Hartson's pickup truck stopped at the Starfish Motel on the outskirts of Port Haskell, a few miles from home. The building was shabby, with a faded sign flashing neon letters and a parking lot with only a couple of cars and a rusty van. The highway hummed nearby, but at 1 in the morning even its noise seemed muffled, as if the world was holding its breath. Edward turned off the engine but didn't get out immediately. His hands were still gripping the steering wheel, his knuckles were white, and a storm was raging in his chest that he could not calm down. Michelle. Her tears. Her confession. Cheating in 2007, flirting with David. 20 years of lies. He grabbed a bottle of whiskey he had bought at a gas station along the way and got out of the car, slamming the door. The cold wind from the ocean whipped his face, but he felt nothing but the heat of rage and pain. The motel was quiet, only the old woman at the counter, who looked like a dried-out turtle, silently gave him the key to room 12 without asking questions. Edward walked down the creaky corridor, entered the room, and threw his jacket on the chair. The room smelled damp and cheap detergent, the bed was made with a faded bedspread, and there was a crooked TV on the wall. He collapsed onto the mattress without taking off his shoes and unscrewed the cap of the bottle. The first sip burned my throat, but did not drown out the memories. They rolled in like the waves that crashed against the pier where he stood an hour ago. Michelle in their first year, her laughter as they danced to the radio in the kitchen. Her letters to Iraq, full of love, which he reread in the tent while the sand creaked on his teeth. And her face today was tear-stained guilty when she talked about that guy from the bar. 2007. He was at war, and she. He clutched the bottle, his jaw tense. How could she? And this David is just a flirt, she said. But her eyes, her panic when he mentioned his name, screamed something else. Edward took another sip, his eyes falling on the cheap painting above the bed, a sunset over the ocean, just like the one at their house. He remembered their evenings on the veranda, how she laid her head on his shoulder, how they planned their old age. Was it all a lie, or just part? He tried to remember if there were signs then, in 2007. She had been tender when he returned, crying, hugging him. But now he wondered, were they tears of joy or guilt? His mind painted pictures. Michelle at the bar, her smile, someone else's hands on her. He growled, throwing the bottle into the corner. It broke, whiskey spilled onto the carpet, but he didn't care. Jealousy gnawed at him like rust. He imagined David smooth, self-confident, with money and words, which he, Edward, always lacked. He was a Marine, an auto mechanic, a man of action, not a talker. But maybe that wasn't enough. Maybe Michelle was tired of his silence, of his simplicity. He remembered her saying, "I wanted to feel alive." These words cut deeper than her betrayal. He wasn't alive for her. He was just Edward, reliable, boring. Memories replaced one another. Their wedding, she in a white dress, her eyes sparkling as he put the ring on her. Caleb's birth, her screams in the hospital, his fear that he wouldn't cope as a father. Their first house, how they painted the walls and laughed, getting dirty with paint. And now her voice, trembling. It was a mistake. Error. 20 years of marriage, and she calls it a mistake. He slammed his fist into the mattress, his breathing heavy as if he were running a marathon. The door to the corridor was slightly open. He did not notice how poorly he closed it. A knock on the door frame made him look up. A woman, about 35, in jeans and a plaid shirt, stood in the doorway with a tray in her hands. Her dark hair was pulled back into a messy bun, and her eyes were warm and slightly worried. "Mr. Hartson?" Her voice was soft, with a southern accent. "I'm Mallory. I work at the cafe across the street. I heard a noise and thought maybe you needed something. I bought coffee." She picked up a tray with a mug and a couple of donuts on it. Edward frowned, wiping his face with his sleeve. He didn't want to see anyone, but her face seemed vaguely familiar. "I'm fine," he muttered, but his voice was hoarse. "No need for coffee." Mallory didn't leave. She placed the tray on the nightstand and sat on the edge of the chair, not taking her eyes off him. "You don't look okay, if I may." "A broken bottle, looking like you were fighting with a ghost. I know it's none of my business, but I saw you around town. You are a good person, Edward. I don't want you to go crazy here alone." He squinted, trying to remember where he had seen her. "How do you know me?" She smiled, slightly embarrassed. "I worked at the fisherman's hut a couple of years ago. You and your wife went there with your son. I was a waitress then, serving you crab soup. You left a good tip and said I remind you of your sister." She shrugged. "I moved to a cafe near the motel, but I remembered you. You stand out." Edward blinked, his mind slowly pulling out an image. A young woman, smiling, with quick movements, serving them food. He hadn't thought about her then, but now her kindness cut like a knife. He didn't deserve this. Not after what I found out about Michelle. "Thank you," he muttered, looking away, "but I'm not in the mood to talk." Mallory nodded but didn't get up. "Understand, I don't climb, really. It's just, I know what it's like when the world falls apart. My ex broke my heart a couple of years ago. Left me for some girl from Savannah. I sat in a room like this and thought it couldn't get any worse. But you know what? It gets easier. Not right away, but it does." Her words touched something in him, but he just clenched his teeth. "It's not the same thing," he said, his voice harsh. "You don't know what she did." Mallory looked at him, her eyes full of sympathy, but without pity. "Maybe, I don't know. But I see that you are suffering. And I know you, Edward Hartson. You're the one who fixed my car when I couldn't pay and didn't charge a dime. You are the one who helped old Jack pull the boat out of the water. You are not one to break down, even now." He wanted to snap back, to tell her to get out, but her voice calm, sincere stopped him. He looked at her, and for the first time that night he felt that someone saw him, and not his pain. Mallory was more than just a waitress. She looked at him with warmth, with something he couldn't name. Admiration, care. He remembered how she sometimes smiled at him at the fisherman's shack, how she lingered at their table a little longer than necessary. Secret admirer, he thought, and the thought was both bitter and strangely comforting. "Why are you here, Mallory?" he asked, his voice softening. "Do you care what's wrong with me?" She shrugged, her cheeks turning slightly pink. "Maybe it shouldn't be, but I care. You have always been kind to me without even knowing it. And I don't want you sitting here alone with a broken bottle and thoughts that are killing you." Edward turned away, his throat tight. Her kindness was like a light in the darkness, but he didn't know how to accept it. He was too full of rage, too broken. Michelle, her betrayal, her words, "I wanted to feel alive." He remembered how she looked at him, begging him to stay, and how he left without looking back. Maybe he was a coward. Maybe he should have stayed and fought for them. But how to fight when everything he believed in turned out to be a lie? "I don't know what to do," he said finally, his voice almost a whisper. She broke everything." Mallory leaned a little closer, her hand hovering in the air, as if she wanted to touch him, but didn't dare. "Maybe she broke it. But you are stronger than you think. You will find a way out. Not today, but you will find it. In the meantime, let me get you some more coffee, or at least clean up this mess." She nodded at the broken bottle. He looked at her, and there was something in her eyes that made his heart flutter. Not love, not desire, just hope. Hope he doesn't drown in this. He nodded, unable to speak. Mallory smiled, stood up, and began to pick up the pieces, her movements careful, almost gentle. Edward looked at her, and for the first time that night he thought that maybe he wasn't completely alone. But deep down he knew that the morning would come, and he would have to decide whether to return to Michelle to fight or leave forever. In the meantime, he sat in the motel, with memories that burned him, and with the kindness of a stranger who, perhaps, saw more in him than he did. The Starfish Motel was silent, broken only by the roar of the highway and the occasional creaking of old pipes. Room 12 smelled of spilled whiskey, dampness, and something subtly alien. Edward Hartson sat on the edge of the bed, his shoes still covered in sand from the beach, and a fire of rage, pain, and alcohol raging in his chest. The broken bottle in the corner was a reminder of his breakdown, but now on the nightstand was a mug of coffee brought by Mallory, the waitress from the cafe across the street. Her presence unexpected, warm was like a ray of light in this hole, but Edward did not know what to do with it. Mallory finished cleaning up the pieces, her movements careful, almost caring. She straightened up, wiping her hands on her jeans, and looked at him with the same soft smile as before. "Well, now at least you won't cut yourself," she said, trying to diffuse the silence. "Would you like me to bring you some more coffee? Or something stronger?" Edward shook his head, his gaze hard but not as prickly. The whiskey still hummed through his veins, dulling the edges of the pain but not numbing it. Michelle, her confession cheating in 2007, flirting with David was like a knife that she stuck in and left in him. He wanted to hate her, wanted to erase her from his life, but every time he closed his eyes, he saw her face tear-stained, pleading, just like when he left home. "Why are you doing this?" he asked, his voice hoarse with whiskey and emotion. "Why are you sitting here with me? I'm nothing to you." Mallory sat down on the chair opposite, her eyes honest, almost vulnerable. "You're not a nobody, Edward. I don't know how to explain. You have always been kind to me without even noticing it, and I see that you're hurting. I can't just walk away and leave you here alone." Her words touched something in him, not warmth, not hope, but something dark, burning. He looked at her dark hair falling out of its bun, at her lips that still held a faint smile. She was beautiful, not flashy, but simply humanly. And she was here, unlike Michelle. He felt an impulse rise within him, not love, not desire, but something closer to revenge. If Michelle could betray him, could seek life with others, then why should he remain faithful? Why should he be the one who suffers? He stood up, his movements were sharp, almost unconscious. "You shouldn't be here," he said, but his voice was low, almost dangerous. He stepped toward her and Mallory looked up, her breath hitching. "Maybe she shouldn't," she answered quietly, without looking away. "But I'm here." Edward froze, their faces were close, too close. The whiskey drowned his mind, the rage pushed him forward, and the pain whispered, "Do it. Let her feel it." He leaned down, his hand touching her cheek, and Mallory didn't move away. Her eyes trembled, but there was no fear in them, only warmth, a desire that may have been smoldering within her for years. She stood up, her hands lay on his chest, and that was the last straw. He kissed her roughly, without tenderness, as if he was trying to prove something to himself, to Michelle, to the whole world. Mallory replied, her fingers clutching his shirt, and the next second they were on the bed, tearing each other's clothes off. This was not love, not even passion, it was revenge, a desperate attempt to drown out the pain. The bed creaked, their breath mixed with the smell of whiskey and dampness, and for a few minutes Edward forgot about everything about Michelle, about her betrayal, about his broken heart. But when it was all over, reality returned like a cold wind from the ocean. Edward lay on his back, staring at the cracked ceiling, his chest heaving. Mallory lay next to her, her breathing uneven, but she was silent, as if sensing that something had changed. He waited for relief, waited for revenge to bring at least a drop of satisfaction, but nothing changed. The emptiness in my chest only became deeper, and the pain became more acute. He felt dirty, a stranger in his own skin. "It was a mistake," he muttered, his voice empty. He sat down, rubbing his face with his hands. "Damn it, Mallory, this shouldn't have happened." She sat up, pulling the sheet over herself. Her eyes were full of pain, but not resentment. "I know," she said quietly. "You didn't want me. You wanted to forget her. Edward looked at her, and there was no condemnation in her gaze, only understanding, which cut him more than anger. He expected her to scream, to demand an explanation, but Mallory just looked at him, and that was the worst of all. She saw him not a hero, not a Marine, but a broken man who had just done something for which he would hate himself. "Sorry," he said, and his voice trembled. "You don't deserve this. You're good, Mallory. And I just ruined everything." She shook her head, her fingers touched his arm, but he pulled away. "Don't blame yourself, Edward. You're not the first to try to numb the pain. And I'm not an innocent lamb. I knew you weren't yourself, but I stayed anyway." She smiled sadly. "Maybe I also wanted something that I couldn't have." Her words were like a slap in the face. He stood up, grabbing his shirt from the floor, his movements abrupt, almost panicked. He couldn't stay here, couldn't look at her, at the bed, at this room that had witnessed his fall. He pulled on his jeans, feeling shame and self-loathing clenching his throat. "I have to go," he said without looking at her. I can't." Mallory nodded, her eyes sparkling, but she wasn't crying. "Go, Edward. But be kind to yourself. You don't deserve to drown in this." He didn't answer. He grabbed his jacket and walked out, slamming the door. The cold air hit his face, but he didn't feel it. He climbed into the pickup, his hands shaking as he inserted the key into the ignition. The engine roared to life, and he pulled out of the parking lot, not knowing where he was going, but knowing he couldn't go home. Not now. Edward drove down the highway, headlights picking out chunks of asphalt, but his thoughts were elsewhere. He expected revenge to give him strength, to burn away the pain, but instead he felt even more broken. It wasn't Mallory's fault. She was kind, sincere, and he used her like she was nothing, as if he was no better than Michelle. This thought struck him like lightning. Michelle, her cheating in 2007, her flirting with David, he hated her for it. But what had he just done? He slept with another woman, not out of love, not out of passion, but out of anger. He became what he despised. He remembered Michelle, her tears, her screams when he left the house. "I love you, Ed," she said. He hadn't believed her then, but now he wondered if there was any truth to it. He remembered their life, their son, their home, their evenings on the veranda. 20 years. He thought revenge would set him free, but it only bound him even more tightly, not to Michelle, but to his own guilt. Edward pulled the pickup to the side of the road, his hands gripping the steering wheel. He looked into the darkness, where the highway disappeared over the horizon. Revenge did not heal his wounds. She didn't erase the pain, didn't give him back control. She only showed him how low he could fall. He thought about Mallory, about her kindness that he had trampled on, about Michelle, whom he loved despite everything, about Caleb, who didn't deserve to see his family fall apart. He hit the steering wheel, his breathing heavy. Tears burned in his eyes, but he did not let them fall. He didn't know what to do: return, fight for them, or leave forever. But he knew one thing: revenge was empty. She didn't save him, didn't heal him. She only left him alone with himself, a person he no longer recognized. Edward started the engine and drove further into the night, not knowing where the road would lead him, but knowing that there was no turning back. Not after this. For 2 days, Edward Hartson disappeared like a ghost, disappearing into the roads of South Carolina. He did not return to the Starfish Motel, where his mistake with Mallory left a new scar on his soul. He didn't call Michelle. He didn't text Caleb. He just drove along the coastal highways, past swamps and dunes, stopping at gas stations to fill up his tank and buy coffee, which he drank without tasting it. His truck became his refuge. The radio was silent, and his thoughts about Michelle, about her betrayal, about his own weakness were like ashes settling on his heart. He tried to run away from the pain, but it rode with him, clinging to his bones. The night in the motel with Mallory did not bring relief, only increased the shame. He betrayed not only Michelle, but also himself, a man who believed in honor, in family, in love. Revenge, sweet in the moment of rage, turned out to be bitter like ash. He saw Mallory's face, her kindness that he trampled, and Michelle's tear-stained face as he left the house. 20 years of marriage, their son, Their house all this stood in front of him like a wall that he did not know how to climb over. But by the morning of the second day, when the sun rose above the ocean, he realized flight would not save him. He must return, not for the sake of revenge, not for the sake of forgiveness, for the sake of the truth, whatever it may be. Edward parked the pickup truck in the driveway of their Port Haskell home. The house looked the same as always: white walls, blue shutters, a veranda where they drank coffee in the morning. But now he seemed alien, as if he belonged to another life. His clothes were wrinkled, his face was overgrown with stubble, his eyes were red from insomnia and the whiskey he drank on the side of the road. He got out of the car, his boots crunching on the gravel, and stood on the porch, looking at the door. My heart was pounding, but not from fear, from fatigue, from the understanding that this step could be the last. The door swung open before he could knock. Michelle stood on the threshold, her face pale, her eyes swollen from crying. She was wearing an old t-shirt and jeans. Her hair was a mess, as if she hadn't slept, hadn't combed her hair, hadn't lived in those 2 days. She gasped when she saw him, her hand pressed to her chest as if she was afraid he would disappear. "Ed," she whispered, her voice breaking. Tears streamed down her cheeks, and she took a step towards him, but stopped, as if she wasn't sure if she had the right. He looked at her, his face was stony, but inside everything was trembling. She looked so fragile, so broken, not the Michelle who had laughed at the party, not the one who had lied to him for years. This was the woman he loved, and the woman who broke his heart. He didn't know how to approach her, how to speak, but the silence was unbearable. "I thought you were going to leave," he said finally, his voice as hoarse as gravel. "To this, David." Michelle shook her head as her sobs grew louder. "No, Ed, no. I didn't go anywhere. I'm here. I was waiting for you." She fell to her knees right on the threshold, her arms wrapped around herself as if she was trying to keep herself from falling apart. "I ruined everything, I know. I lied, I betrayed you, and I don't deserve you, but please, please don't leave again." Edward looked at her, his chest tightening. He wanted to be cold, wanted to hold his pain as a shield, but her tears, her voice pierced his defenses. He stepped closer, but did not touch her. "Do you think I can just forget?" he asked. His voice was low, but it was trembling with pain. "You cheated on me, Michelle, when I was at war, when I thought that you were waiting for me. And now this David. You said you loved me, but you were looking for something with him. How can I live with this?" She looked up at him, eyes full of despair. "I know what I did, Ed. I hate myself for this. That time in 2007. I was lost. I was afraid that I would lose you, that you would not come back. It's not an excuse, I know. It was my weakness, my mistake. And David." She swallowed, her voice shaking. "I didn't sleep with him, I swear. We talked, he made me feel needed. But I stopped, Ed. I realized that I only want you, only us." He clenched his jaw, his hands clenched into fists. Her words were like salt in the wound. He remembered Mallory, her warmth, her body beneath him, his own weakness. He wanted to tell Michelle, to throw it in her face that he, too, had stumbled, but shame held his tongue. He was no better than her. He betrayed her just as she betrayed him, and that truth was heavier than her lies. "Do you think words will fix this?" he asked, his voice hard. 20 years, Mitchell. I lived for you. For Caleb. I thought we—" He trailed off, his throat tightening. "I thought we were real." Michelle sobbed as she crawled up the steps towards him. "We are real, Ed. I love you. I have always loved you. I know I broke us, but I'm willing to do anything to fix it. I'll go to a psychologist. I'll stop working. If necessary, I'll do anything. Just don't leave." She grabbed his hand, pressing it to her face, her tears streaming down his fingers. "I take all the blame on myself. All. Just give me a chance." Edward looked at her, his heart breaking. He saw her love, her pain, but he also saw his own wounds, her betrayal, her flirting, years of lies, and my own guilt. Mallory. He couldn't tell her, not now, but the secret was like poison running through his veins. He wanted to forgive her. He wanted to hold her in his arms and forget everything, but something inside him was broken, and he didn't know if it could be fixed. "I don't know, Mitchell," he said finally, his voice quiet, almost broken. I don't know if I can let this go. You, you destroyed me. She sobbed louder, clinging to his legs. Then destroy me, Ed. Scream, hit dishes, do anything. Just don't be silent. Don't leave me alone. He sat down on the steps next to her, his hands shaking. He didn't touch her, but his proximity was like a bridge, shaky but still standing. The ocean roared behind the house, its roar the only sound in the silence. Edward looked at her, at his wife, at the woman he loved more than life itself, and tried to find strength within himself. Not for forgiveness, it was too far away, but to stay to try. I can't promise that everything will be the same, he said, his voice hoarse. But I'm here. Bye. Michelle looked up, her face wet with tears, but with a spark of hope. She nodded, unable to speak, and gently touched his arm. He didn't move away, but he didn't answer either. They sat on the threshold, two broken people, surrounded by the ashes of their marriage, and neither of them knew what would happen next. But they were together, and maybe that was enough to start. The morning at the Hartson house was quiet, but not peaceful. The ocean outside the window whispered its song, and the living room smelled of freshly brewed coffee that no one drank. Edward and Michelle sat at the kitchen table, separated not only by the wooden tabletop, but also by the gulf that had grown between them over the past few days. His return after 2 days of absence was a step, but not a reconciliation. Her tears on the threshold, her pleas for forgiveness were sincere, but could not erase the truth. The betrayal in 2007, the flirtation with David, his own sin with Mallory. All this lay between them like shards of glass that they were afraid to touch. Edward looked older than he was. His stubble was overgrown, his eyes were sunken from lack of sleep, and his hands lay motionless on the table, as if he was afraid that any movement would reveal his pain. Michelle, on the other hand, was fussy. Her fingers fiddled with the edge of the napkin, her eyes kept running to his face, looking for any hint of warmth. She put on his old flannel shirt, as if trying to bring back their past, but it only emphasized how far they had come from those days. We need to talk, Ed, she began, her voice quiet but decisive. For real. Don't scream, don't run away. Just talk. He nodded without looking up. His throat tightened, but he knew she was right. Flight did not help. Revenge did not heal. Silence only stifled. Okay, he said, his voice hoarse. Speak. Michelle swallowed, her fingers stilling. I know what I did. I lied to you, Ed, not only about 2007, but also about how I felt. I was unhappy, and instead of telling you, I was looking for something different. With David. She winced as she said his name. It's not an excuse, but I want you to understand. I didn't want to lose you. I just lost myself. Edward looked at her, his face motionless, but inside he was seething. Her words were honest, but they cut like a knife. He remembered her confession, that guy at the bar while he was in Iraq, her flirtation with that real estate developer, and Mallory. His own guilt was like a shadow that he could not banish. He wanted to tell her, to cleanse himself, but the fear that this would completely destroy them held his tongue. Do you think this explains everything? He asked, his voice low, but without malice. You were unhappy, and instead of talking to me, you went to others. How am I supposed to forget this, Mitchell? How am I supposed to look at you and not see that guy? Or this, David? Her eyes filled with tears, but she did not look away. I don't know, Ed. I don't know if it's possible to forget this, but I want to try. I want us to start again. Not like before I know that this is impossible, but like two people who love each other and want to fight. He shook his head, his fingers clenching into fists. Love? You talk about love, but where was it when you lied to me? When did you flirt with him? You broke our trust, Michelle. I don't know how to get it back. I don't know if I can trust you at all. Her lips trembled, but she nodded, accepting his words. I know. Trust. That's what I broke. And I don't expect you to just forgive me. But I'm ready to work on it. I made an appointment with a psychologist, Ed, next week, and I want you to come with me, if you want. Edward frowned, his gaze falling on the coffee cooling in his mug. psychologist. He never believed in these conversations, in digging into the past. He was a Marine, a man of action, not words. But the thought of sitting in the office with her, sorting out their pain, scared him no less than the thought of leaving forever. "What if it doesn't work?" he asked, his voice almost a whisper. "What if I can never forget? Every time I look at you, I see all of this, you in that bar. You are with him, and I don't know how to turn it off." Michelle sobbed, but her voice remained strong. "Then we'll live with it. We will study. I'm not asking you to forget, Ed. I ask you to give me a chance to prove that I can be better, that we can be better." He looked at her, and there was such a mixture of hope and pain in her eyes that his heart trembled. He wanted to believe her, wanted to go back to those days when their love was simple, pure. But the ghosts of the past stood between them, her betrayal, his night with Mallory. He didn't tell her, and this secret was like a stone on his soul. He knew he had to be honest, but the fear that it would destroy their fragile attempt at reconciliation was greater. "What if I'm also not who you think I am?" he asked, his voice heavy. "What if I did something that breaks you the same way you broke me?" Michelle froze, her eyes widening. "What do you mean?" Her voice trembled, and a new fear flashed in it. "Ed, what are you talking about?" He opened his mouth, but no words came. Mallory. Her name was on the tip of his tongue, but he couldn't pronounce it. Not now, not like that. Instead, he shook his head, looking away. "Nothing. It's just, I'm not perfect either. I was angry, I was broken. I don't know who I am without you, Michelle." Her face softened, but the fear did not go away. She reached across the table, but stopped short of touching it. "Then let's find out," she said quietly. "Let's find out who we are now. Together, if you still want me." Edward looked at her hand lying so close and felt his own fears rise like waves. He was afraid that he would never be able to forget her betrayal, that her every glance would remind him of 2007, of David. He was afraid that his own guilt the night with Mallory would one day come out and ruin everything. And most of all, he was afraid that their love, no matter how strong it was, would not withstand this burden. But he was also afraid of losing her, losing their home, their son, their life. He remembered how she was waiting for him on the threshold, how she cried, how she took all the blame upon herself. She didn't go to David, she didn't give up. She struggled, and maybe that was what kept him here despite everything. "I don't know if it will work," he said finally, his voice hoarse, "but I'm not ready to leave." "Not really." Michelle nodded, tears streaming down her cheeks again, but she smiled, a weak, trembling smile. "That's enough, Ed. That's enough for now." They sat in silence, the coffee getting cold, the ocean roaring outside the window. The ghosts of the past, her betrayal, his betrayal, their broken trust, have not disappeared. They were there, in every glance, in every unspoken word. But they spoke, and this was the first step. Not to oblivion, oblivion was impossible. To something new, fragile, but perhaps real. Edward reached out and covered her hand with his. Her skin was cold but familiar. He didn't know if they could start again, but he knew he wanted to try. And that, for now, was enough. The Hartsons' home in Port Haskell seemed frozen in time. White walls, blue shutters, a porch where their old wicker chairs still stood. But inside the air was thick with understatement. Edward and Michelle tried to improve their lives after his return, after her tears on the threshold, after their conversation, full of pain and ghosts of the past. They talked, held hands, made an appointment with a family psychologist, but the wounds her betrayal in 27, her flirtation with David, his night with Mallory did not heal. They were like cracks in the foundation, invisible from the outside, but ready to collapse everything at the first shock. Michelle sat locked in the bathroom, her hands shaking as she clutched the plastic pregnancy test. Two stripes looked at her like a sentence. She knew it was possible the last weeks had been chaotic, her intimacy with Edward, rare and almost desperate, an attempt to regain what they had lost. But now, looking at the test, she felt panic tightening her throat. Pregnancy. At 42, after 20 years of marriage, after everything they had been through. She should have been happy, a child, a new chance, a symbol of their love. But instead of joy, she felt fear. Will this save their marriage? Or will it completely destroy it? Michelle clutched the test to her chest, her eyes filling with tears. She didn't tell Edward about her suspicions, didn't mention the delay, the morning sickness, the trip to the pharmacy. How to tell him? He barely began to look at her without pain in his eyes. He barely began to speak to her without coldness. Her betrayal, her lies still stood between them like a wall. And his own secret, she sensed he was hiding something, even though he didn't say it, made everything even more difficult. The child could be the bridge, but it could also be the last straw that breaks them. She left the bathroom, stashing the test in her jeans pocket, and went down to the living room. Edward sat on the sofa, leafing through the newspaper, but his gaze was absent. He looked tired, his stubble had grown long, and his shoulders were tense, as if he were waiting for a blow. She stood in the doorway, her heart pounding. "Ed," she called quietly, her voice trembling. "We need to talk." He looked up, his brows furrowed. "What's happened?" His tone was cautious, but there was anxiety in it. Their last conversation was full of tears and accusations, and he wasn't sure if he was ready for another. Michelle swallowed, her fingers gripping the edge of her pocket where the test lay. I don't know how to say this." She took a step closer, her eyes searching for him, but he looked at her with wariness. "I'm pregnant, Ed." Silence fell like a hammer blow. Edward froze, his face motionless, but his eyes widened. The newspaper fell from his hands, rustling onto the floor. "What?" His voice was hoarse, as if he didn't trust his ears. "Are you pregnant?" She nodded, tears streaming down her cheeks. "I just found out. I didn't plan this, Ed, but it's true." He stood up. His movements were sharp, almost mechanical. He paced the room, his hand rubbing the back of his head as if he was trying to comprehend the news. Pregnancy, child, their child. He should have felt joy like he did when Michelle was waiting for Caleb. But instead he felt chaos, love, anger, fear, everything mixed in his chest like a storm. "How did this happen?" he asked, his voice low, almost accusing. "We barely." He stopped short, remembering their rare nights, full not so much of passion as of despair. "Oh my God, Michelle." She stepped towards him, her hands shaking. "I know this is unexpected. I'm shocked. But this is our baby, Ed. Our. Maybe this is a chance for us." He looked at her, and his eyes were full of pain. "Chance?" He almost laughed, but the laugh was bitter. "Do you think a child will fix everything? Your betrayal? Your years of lies? This? Flirting with David?" His voice broke on the last word, and he turned away, looking out the window where the ocean roared in the distance. Michelle sobbed, but her voice remained strong. "I'm not saying this will fix it. I know what I did, Ed. I know I broke our trust. But this child, it's not his fault. He is part of us. And I thought, maybe he'll give us a reason to fight." Edward clenched his jaw, his hands clenched into fists. He wanted to believe her, wanted to cling to this hope, but the ghosts of the past were too close. He remembered 2007, her confession about that guy at the bar while he was in Iraq. I remembered her words about David, how she felt alive. And Mallory is his own weakness, his revenge, which brought nothing but shame. He didn't tell her, and this secret was like a poison, poisoning his every step towards reconciliation. "Do you think I can just forget?" he asked, turning to her. His voice was quiet, but there was steel in it. "Every time I look at you, I see it. You are with him. You are lying to me. And now, a child. How should I be happy when I don't know if I can trust you?" Michelle gasped, her face turning pale. "I know I don't deserve your trust, Ed. I know I ruined us, but I'm trying to fix this. I'm seeing a psychologist. I've cut off all contact with David. I'm doing everything I can." She took a step closer, her voice trembling. "This child, he shouldn't be a punishment. He can be our hope." Edward shook his head, his eyes shining with unshed tears. "Hope? Michelle, I love you. God, I love you so much it kills me. But I hate what you did. I hate that you lied to me, that you were looking for someone else. And I—" He paused, his voice breaking. I hate myself for not being able to let this go." Her eyes widened. She felt that he was not saying anything. "Ed, what do you mean?" Her voice was full of fear. "What are you hiding?" He froze. His heart skipped a beat. Mallory. He should have told. He should have been honest. But the words stuck in his throat. Instead, he shook his head, looking away. "Nothing. It's just, I don't know who we are anymore. I don't know if I can be a father again when I can barely hold myself together." Michelle stepped towards him. Her hand touched his shoulder, but he tensed and she withdrew her hand. "You don't have to be perfect, Ed. You were already a father to Caleb, and you were the best. This baby, he won't replace what we lost, but he may be a reason to move on, together." Edward looked at her, and there was such a mixture of love and despair in her eyes that his heart sank. He thought about Caleb, how his birth had connected them, given them purpose. He thought about the new child, the tiny life that was already growing inside her. He would love this child, he knew that. But love for the child could not erase the hatred of her betrayal, could not restore the trust that she had broken. "What if I can't?" he asked, his voice almost a whisper. "What if I stay for the sake of the child, but every day I see your betrayal? This is not life, Michelle. Not for me, not for you, not for him." She began to cry, her shoulders shaking. "Then go away, Ed. If you can't forgive, if you can't live with me, leave. But I don't want this. I want you. I want our family, and I will fight even if you give up." Her words were like a blow. He looked at her, at his wife, at the woman he loved more than life itself, and tried to find an answer. Staying for his family, for Caleb, for the new baby would have been the right thing to do, but it meant living with the pain, with the memories of her betrayal, with his own guilt. Leaving, running away from everything would have been easier, but it meant losing her, losing them, losing the chance for a new life. "I don't know what to do," he said finally, his voice broken. "I love you, Michelle, and I already love this child, but I don't know if this is enough." She nodded, her tears dripping onto the table. "Then don't decide now. Give us time. Give us a chance. Please." Edward looked at her, his mind a chaos. He thought about Mallory, about the betrayal he was hiding. He thought about 2007, about David, about the years of lies. And he thought about the child, an innocent life that didn't deserve their pain. He didn't know if he could forgive, if he could forget. But he knew he wasn't ready to leave. Not really. He reached out and took her hand. Her fingers were cold, but they squeezed his hand, as if she was afraid he would disappear. "I'll stay," he said quietly. "Bye. But that doesn't mean I've forgiven. This doesn't mean that everything will be the same." Michelle nodded, her face wet with tears, but she smiled, a weak, trembling smile. "I know, but you are here. That's all I need." They sat in silence, holding hands, while the ocean roared outside the window. Their love was alive but wounded, their trust shattered, their future uncertain. The child was hope, but not salvation. And yet they were together, and it was their choice to fight, despite the pain, despite the ghosts of the past, despite the dilemma that had no easy answer. The Hartson home in Port Haskell, South Carolina, had been their refuge, but now it had become a battlefield. Edward and Michelle tried to pick up the pieces of their marriage, but every step was like walking on glass. Her betrayal in 2007, her flirtation with David, his own night with Mallory, all this hung between them like ghosts that could not be exorcised. Michelle's unexpected pregnancy was both hope and a new challenge. They decided to fight, but love, once their anchor, was now wounded and trust was shattered. A week after the news of the pregnancy, Edward and Michelle began seeing family psychologist Dr. Linda Carter, whose office in downtown Port Haskell was small but cozy, with soft sofas and a view of the ocean. Linda, a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and a calm voice, did not promise miracles, but gave them space to speak. Edward hated these sessions at first. He was a Marine, a man of action, not words, and dwelling on the past seemed like a weakness to him. But for Michelle's sake, and for the sake of the child she was carrying, he agreed. At the first session, they sat at opposite ends of the sofa, their bodies tense like strings. Linda asked them to start with honesty. Michelle spoke first, her voice shaking, but she didn't look away. "I betrayed Ed," she said, clenching her hands. "In 2007, when he was in Iraq, I had a connection. Once. And recently I was flirting with another man, David. I broke our trust, and I know I don't deserve his forgiveness. But I want to fight for us. For our child." Edward looked at the floor, his jaw clenched. He felt her words cut him, but there was truth in them that he could not deny. Linda turned to him. "Edward, how do you feel hearing this?" He swallowed, his voice low, almost a growl. "I feel anger, pain. I loved her, I lived for her, and she lied to me for years. And now this child. I want him, I already love him, but I don't know how to live with her. Every time I look at her, I see her cheating." Michelle sobbed but didn't protest. Linda nodded, her gaze neutral but attentive. "Edward, you said that you want to forgive. What does forgiveness mean to you?" He frowned, his fingers gripping the armrest. "I don't know. I'm trying. I come here, I listen, I haven't left. But I can't forget. I can't erase it from my mind, her with that guy, her with David, and I don't know how to trust her again." The sessions continued once a week. They talked about the past, about pain, about what brought them here. Michelle opened up about her loneliness in 2007, her fear that Edward wouldn't return, the void she was trying to fill. She talked about David, how his attention made her feel like she was alive again. Edward listened, sometimes remained silent, sometimes exploded, accusing her of weakness, of betrayal. But he didn't talk about Mallory. His own guilt was like a stone that he carried in his chest, and each session made it heavier. Linda noticed his restraint, but did not press him. "Edward," she said one day, "forgiveness does not mean forgetting. It means accepting the pain and choosing how to live with it. But you can't make that choice until you're honest with Michelle and with yourself." He nodded but didn't speak. He couldn't. Talking about Mallory meant ruining their fragile attempt at reconciliation, admitting that he was no better than her. He tried to forgive, tried to see Michelle not as a traitor, but as the woman he loved. But every time she smiled, every time she put her hand on her growing belly, he saw the shadows: that guy at the bar, David, their lies, and his own reflection in the motel mirror where he betrayed her. Michelle gave birth in early December, 9 months after they talked about pregnancy. The girl was named Anna, a name they chose together while sitting on the veranda in a rare moment of peace. The birth was difficult, but Michelle held on, and Edward was there, holding her hand, despite the storm in his soul. When he first held Anna in his arms, tiny, with dark hair and blue eyes, his heart sank with love. She was theirs, part of him, innocent and pure. He swore to himself that he would protect her, that he would give her everything that he could not give to their marriage. But even the birth of Anna did not heal them. Michelle hoped that the child would bring them closer, that Edward would see in her not only pain, but also a future. She cooked his favorite dishes, left notes with declarations of love, took care of him, as in the first years of their marriage. But Edward was distant. He smiled at Anna, rocked her in his arms, changed her diapers, but with Michelle he was cold. Linda's sessions continued, but his answers became shorter, his gaze became emptier. One day, when Anna was 3 months old, Michelle couldn't stand it. They were in the living room, Anna asleep in the cradle, and Edward looking out the window, his face unreadable. "Ed," she said, her voice shaking, "you are here, but you are not there. You keep me at a distance. I'm trying, I'm doing the best I can, but you don't give me a chance." He turned, his eyes tired but firm. "I'm trying, Michelle. I come to a psychologist, I live here, I take care of Anna. But I can't forget. I can't look at you and not see your betrayal. I can't trust you." Her eyes filled with tears. "Then tell me what to do. I can't change the past, Ed. I can only love you and Anna. Is this not enough?" He shook his head, his voice quiet but heavy. "I don't know. I thought I could, for Anna's sake, for our sake. But every day, it's like living with a knife in your chest. I love you, Michelle, but I hate what you did, and I don't know how to live with this." She cried, but did not object. She knew that he was right, her betrayal, Her lies were a wound that would not heal, and she felt that he was hiding something, but she could not force him to talk. They were at a dead end, and Anna, their daughter, was the only thing holding them together. The decision came to Edward at night, when Anna was crying and Michelle was rocking her in the bedroom. He sat on the veranda, looking at the ocean, and realized that he could no longer live like this. He loved Anna, he loved Michelle, but his hatred for her betrayal was stronger. He couldn't forgive, couldn't forget, couldn't trust, and his own guilt the night with Mallory made everything even worse. He didn't tell Michelle, and it was his burden, but he knew he couldn't be with her while he carried this secret. The next day, he packed his bag. Michelle was in the living room, feeding Anna, when he came in, his face determined, but his eyes full of pain. "I'm leaving, Mitchell," he said, his voice even, but inside he was trembling. "I can't live here anymore." She froze, her hands squeezing Anna a little tighter. "What?" Her voice was a whisper, full of horror. "Ed, no, please don't do this." "We can." "No," he interrupted, his voice firm. I tried. I tried to forgive. I tried to be with you for Anna's sake. But I can't. I see your betrayal every day, and it kills me. I can't be the husband you deserve, and the father Anna deserves if I stay." Michelle began to cry, her face turning pale. "Ed, I love you. Anna loves you. We are your family. Don't go, please. I'll do anything." He shook his head, his eyes sparkling. "This is not about you, Mitchell. This is about me. I can't live with this. I will visit Anna. I will help with money. I will always be her father. But I can't be your husband. Not now." She stood up, holding Anna, and stepped towards him, her voice breaking into a scream. "Are you leaving us because of one mistake? Alone, Ed. I know it's my fault, but I fought, I changed. How can you leave?" He looked at her, and there was such pain in his gaze that she suffocated. "This is not one mistake, Mitchell. These are years of lies. This is trust that no longer exists, and—" He paused, almost ready to talk about Mallory, but stopped. "I just can't." He took the bag and went to the door. Michelle called after him, her voice breaking, but he didn't turn around. The door slammed and his pickup roared into the driveway. Anna began to cry, as if feeling her world was falling apart, and Michelle fell to her knees, clutching her daughter to her chest, her sobs echoing in the empty house. Edward rented a small apartment above his auto repair shop. He worked late, repairing cars, drinking coffee, trying to drown out the emptiness. He visited Anna every week, bringing toys, diapers, and money. Michelle was polite, but her eyes were empty, as if part of her had died when he left. He looked at Anna, at her tiny fingers, at her smile, and felt love, but also pain. He could not be with her every day. He could not be a family. Michelle raised Anna alone, worked at a travel agency, and went to see a psychologist. She tried to be strong, but every time Edward came, her heart broke all over again. She blamed herself for 2007, for David, for not being able to keep him. She loved Anna, but her daughter was a constant reminder of what she had lost. Edward didn't tell Mallory. He thought about it, but stopped every time, knowing it would only cause more pain. He saw Mallory once in a motel cafe, and she smiled at him, but he left without saying a word. His guilt was his burden, and he carried it alone. Michelle stood at the living room window, holding Anna in her arms. The girl was sleeping. Her breathing was soft like the whisper of the ocean. Outside the window, the sun was setting, turning the sky crimson. Edward had just left. He brought Anna a new toy, kissed her on the forehead, but only talked to Michelle about business. His eyes were cold, distant, as if he had built a wall that she couldn't break through. She held Anna close, her tears dripping onto her daughter's soft hair. She knew she had lost him. One mistaken night in 2007, years of lies, weakness with David cost her the love of her life. She fought, she begged, she changed, but it wasn't enough. Edward loved Anna, but he could not love her, he could not forgive her, he could not forget. Michelle looked out at the ocean, its waves as eternal as their pain. She knew that she would live for Anna's sake, for her own sake. But part of her heart remained with Edward, with the man who once carried her across the threshold of this house, with the one who was her home. And now, standing at the window, she realized some mistakes cannot be corrected, some wounds cannot be healed, and some loves, even the greatest, cannot withstand the weight of betrayal. Subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think, click to the next one.